82-year-old guy comes into the hospital with very low blood sugar. He has diabetes. He lives alone, home with his wife. He has 2 kids. He took his insulin and he didn't eat anything. So naturally, he's going to have low blood sugar. It makes sense. This time it was very low. I don't know. For those of you who know numbers, it was like about 28, which is ridiculously low. That's so low we're bordering on brain damage because the brain doesn't have enough sugar. This was not the first time he'd come in with low blood sugar because he took insulin and didn't eat anything. He does this about once or twice a year. This is the worst it's been so far, but this seems to be a pattern he's getting into of showing his inability to manage his medication and his disease while living alone. His children want him, very concerned, very appropriate children, having his best interest in mind. I think that was clear from the outset. They want him to go into some type of assisted living facility to help him manage his medicine, do his laundry, that kind of stuff. The doctor says, this is clearly a pattern of an inability to manage your medication at home. Yeah, you need to do this, sir. He says, absolutely not. I've lived in this home for 35 years. I built it myself. I don't want to live anywhere else, and nobody's going to tell me what to do. And of course, he jumps straight to, they just want my house so they can sell it for the money. That's all my kids want. That's all they care about. I never saw his house. I don't know how much it is, but regardless of the fact, that's where they jump to. He could not see that they simply had his best interest in mind. Maybe they did want the money. I don't know. But regardless of the case, you can see that there's some good intentions here on the part of the children. Naturally, he did end up going home. Ultimately, the question hinged on decision-making, that's what we'll talk about. But we live in a liberal society, and I use the word liberal there. This is the philosopher. I mean, it's not in terms of liberal versus conservative. President Bush versus President Obama. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about liberal in that we value liberty. That's where the word liberal comes from. Again, etymologically. In other words, in our country, in our society, liberty is almost always the primary value that we uphold. That's what we were founded on as Americans. Don't tread on me, liberty or death. And so we place freedom. My freedom comes before a lot of other values, where a lot of other countries, a lot of other societies don't place that value on freedom so much. They balance it with other things. Other things take precedence. And for the most part, in our country, you can do what you want as long as you don't hurt someone else. That for the most part, there are lots of exceptions to that naturally. But for the most part, that's how we think about things. How many times a day do you hear the phrase, "Oh, it's still a free country, isn't it?" That's how we think about things as a society. Now, there are some limits to liberty, and one of those classic ones is you can't act so that you're impinging on another person's liberty. Your freedom can't impose on another person's freedom. But ultimately, I think this comes from respect for autonomy, philosophically. Autonomy is literally, it comes from Greek, it means self-law. That you are the law unto yourself. You are your own king, you are your own ruler, you are your own determinant. You determine yourself, your life, your body, what you do, how you live. Some other kind of definitions of what it means to respect for autonomy, again, more philosophical, but all people have an obligation to forbear from unconsented to force against other people. So in other words, you don't force, you have a duty, an obligation, a requirement not to force people to do things against their will. That's one view here. Another one is recognizing everybody has a right to have these values, these beliefs that we talked about, and a right to act on those beliefs and their values and make choices on them and live their life in accordance with those beliefs and values. And therefore, we have an obligation to kind of let them do that, act how they see fit. Some other definitions. This is one of the older ones. Treat human beings as an end in themselves and never merely as a means to an end. That's from Immanuel Kant, who's a famous philosopher in the 1700s. This is one of my favorite ones as far as being fluffy and flowery and whatnot. The right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning of the universe, and the mystery of human life. It's from the Supreme Court. So, that's on that. But contrast this kind of, I'd say about 50, 60 years ago, again, I'm using medicine here, doctors made decisions. You didn't necessarily ask a patient if they wanted chemotherapy. You just ordered it, and you did it. You didn't necessarily tell a patient they were dying of cancer because that was thought to be too difficult for them to deal with. So you talked to the family members, and they may or may not have told the patient. That was how medicine went 60, 70, 80 years ago. That was the norm. And that's been really kind of denigrated. Paternalism is the term that we use for it in medicine, that the doctor knows what's best, kind of in the way that, in the 50s, daddy knew what's best, that kind of stuff. And so the doctor's going to tell you what it is that we're going to do. And ultimately, if you think about it, if beneficence, doing good for people, is the most important value we're talking about, if that's the primary value, then we should do what's best for patients regardless of what they want. Think about that case I talked about, the 82-year-old guy. It's pretty clear that he can't manage his medicines by himself and that he is a danger to himself doing that. It's best for him to have help with that. Therefore, we're not going to ask what he wants. We're going to tell him what we're going to do about what's best for him. Anybody who's ever had children know that simply because you want something doesn't mean it's best for you. That's what we're talking about here. And again, so over the past 50 years or so, we've had a switch between beneficence as the primary principle and respect for autonomy as the primary principle. Again, this is in the hospital world. But, and that's a response to a number of things, but one of them is, how do you define what's best? How do you define what's good? People can disagree on that. What's good for this guy, he thinks it's going home. He thinks living in his house outweighs any risk whatsoever of brain damage from low blood sugar. But more importantly, who are you to tell me what's best for me? I know my life. I know what I want. Anybody have teenagers in here? You know exactly what I'm talking about. So I have a 2-year-old right now, and I know this is exactly what we had this fight yesterday about what's best for him. Who are you to say what's best for you? Again, if it's 2-year-old, that's one thing. But if it's two adults in a conversation, in a situation, it's tough to argue to say that I know what's best for you so much so that I'm going to force you to do it. And that ultimately is, I think, why we've had this pendulum swing over to respect for autonomy over the past 50, 60, 70 years or so.